We're very happy to be with you again, and we'll continue discussing the 12 principles and values of successful Krishna-conscious Grihastha ashrams. And today we'll be looking at family love and affection. So to begin with, we're going to examine some of the attitudes and paradigms there are that surround the issues of love and affection within families. And sometimes in Srila Prabhupada's books, there are statements which seem somewhat contradictory and sometimes difficult to understand, and sometimes which can be misinterpreted and misapplied. And so for an example, we can see in the Srimad Bhagavatam, sometimes it's described how the family members are like jackals. And the wife is like a witch. So this is this is referring to mundane, materialistic Grihamedi life. And there's a vast difference between Grihamedi and Grihastha. So Grihastha ashram, ashram means a place of spiritual culture.
Prabhupada said it should be a factory for producing Krishna consciousness.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, many of these types of statements early in the movement and sometimes still today are misunderstood and misapplied. In the early days of ISKCON, if a brahmachari was getting married, it would be considered a fall down. And sometimes he would be scorned by the other brahmacharis and put down. And unfortunately, some of those attitudes and paradigms are still somewhat prevalent in our society. We met one devotee in Brazil who told us when he was married, one of his brahmachari friends gave him a wedding present. And that wedding present was a bucket, a flashlight, and a rope for the deep, dark well of married life. So that's not a very encouraging way to start your transition into the Grihastha ashram. And very recently, we were in one country where one devotee told us when he left the brahmachari ashram, the other brahmacharis said to him, "Why are you betraying us? Why are you betraying the brahmachari ashram?" So that paradigm is still, unfortunately, very strong. And contrary to that, and in the correct understanding and paradigm, we see in some places when a brahmachari gets married in ISKCON, they will actually have a ceremony to honor that transition. The brahmachari will have some white cloth that's offered to the deity, and the cloth will be offered to the deity. Then that brahmachari goes and he puts on the white cloth. And actually one brahmachari was telling us how it's in New York, I think it was the Bhakti Center, and how the guru actually touched the brahmachari's feet to release him from the brahmachari ashram. So it was actually a festival, samskara, to honor that transition so that the brahmachari got support for that ashram.
And blessings.
And blessings. So that is very important. So those kinds of negative attitudes and paradigms are very important to understand and be able to counter them with proper knowledge. Especially statements how Grihastha life is like a deep, dark well. That's a very negative paradigm. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he said that the Grihastha ashram is a very noble and important ashram for making spiritual advancement.
He actually said that it's the best ashram for a Vaishnava.
And because of exposure to those negative paradigms, sometimes grihastas, when they're in a period in their life, maybe they're under some stress, and everyone experiences stress in their life. Maybe you have children, you're working, you're probably paying off some student loans, you have your sadhana to do, you have your work responsibilities, and sometimes life can be stressful. And in those times of stress, if you have been exposed to those negative attitudes and paradigms, you may actually start to believe them. Maybe this is a deep, dark well. Maybe family life is actually Maya. And by absorbing those negative paradigms, it can completely undermine your enthusiasm for your ashram, which is very dangerous. Radhanath Maharaj, he was at a wedding I performed many years ago, and he spoke, and he said, actually, the Grihastha ashram is the best ashram for making spiritual advancement. And he said, in the Grihastha ashram, you have to develop humility and tolerance and patience and kindness. And he said, those are the qualities you need for pure devotional service. So what better environment is there to develop those qualities of a pure devotee than being in that situation where you have to practice those qualities? So it's very important to understand properly these paradigms, and also to understand that we don't always have to accept everything we hear, because sometimes the philosophy can be spoken in ways that are misconstrued and incorrect. And it's important for us as aspiring Vaishnavas to realize that if something doesn't resonate, we should get confirmation from Guru and also other sadhus that is that actually correct, so that we don't get misled in improper ideas. Let's see something about the affection paradigm.
I've found that devotees can struggle in the beginning understanding attachment and detachment. It's very easy to misunderstand it in terms of material vision. So when Srila Prabhupada says that we should not become attached, it means that we don't think that we're the doer, that our family is the source of, that we're completely dependent on them, and that this relationship is my all in all. The relationship can be very important for us to advance in spiritual life. So when we say we should not be attached to our family members, it means that we must do the best we can, but the result is up to Krishna. Like we raise our children the best that we can, we try to help them have an attachment to Krishna, but in the end, they get to choose their own actions. So we don't have the right to that forcing things the way we want it. So we can't be attached to the outcome. So detachment doesn't mean we don't do our duty. Oh, I'm detached. That can just be a cop-out. Whereas I'm detached means I'm really trying hard to do my best. But I understand that each individual has their own karma, that Krishna may have another plan, and I'm just doing the best according to the inspiration that I'm getting today. So we don't need to be afraid of attachment in Grihastha life. In the early days, when devotees would hear that we're not supposed to be attached to our family, one devotee asked Prabhupada, "Is it okay to love my child?" And Prabhupada just looked at them like, what kind of a question is that? Of course. In other words, we're not really understanding what attachment means. So we have to be very careful not to, in the name of being artificially detached, to not show proper Vaishnava love and affection to all living entities, what to speak of our family members. We were explaining in the last session on focusing on children's welfare that children very much need to have a strong bond of attachment with their parents in order to develop security and to become well-rounded individuals later on in life. So we need to display affectionate dealings with our partners and all of our family members. That's very, very important for our self-esteem, for our practice of Vaishnava etiquette, for advancing in Krishna consciousness.
So again, sometimes a negative paradigm can creep in that affection is Maya, that I shouldn't be affectionate to my spouse. I should be somewhat distant from my children. But I'm going to read a quote. This is the first quote in that list, Lavanga. I'll just read it. This is from Srimad Bhagavatam 1.8.42. To cut off the tie of all other affections does not mean complete negation of the finer elements like affection for someone else. This is not possible. A living being, whoever he may be, must have this feeling of affection for others because this is a symptom of life. The symptoms of life, such as desire, anger, hankerings, feelings of attraction, etc., cannot be annihilated. So it's significant that Prabhupada used the word symptom of life. Affection, he said, is a symptom of life. So within my body, I have a pulse, and if I feel my pulse, that's a symptom of the life within my body. If you were to feel my arm and there was no pulse, there was no symptom of the heartbeat, you would know that I'm in cardiac arrest and I'm very soon going to die. So in the same way in marriages, if they don't have that symptom of affection, that can result in serious problems in the marriage and even the end of marriages. So it's extremely important to have that healthy attitude and paradigm that affection is a very necessary element of Vaishnava relationships, of Vaishnava marriages, and within Vaishnava families to have those loving exchanges. It's extremely important. And it's extremely important that Vaishnavas not minimize affection in the name of spiritual advancement. So obviously, a sannyasi, he's not going to go around being affectionate to women and children in the sense that he's going to give them hugs and always be playing with the kids. And he's going to remain some respectful social distance. But for grihastas, it's very important that they have those kind of affectionate exchanges, especially for children.
A big part of affection is displaying gratitude. We need to be observing what our partners are doing well and nicely and expressing gratitude for what they offer us. Because love must be reciprocal. It's not like it's a one-way street that, I'm just the boss. My wife and my kids are my servants, or my husband's my servant, and he has to give me everything I need. We'll have the wrong attitude, and we could get the wrong sense of attachment. But if we have gratitude and we're very much thankful for what they offer, then we won't develop that overfamiliarity. Because that overfamiliarity can lead to contempt and resentment. And contempt is the number one precursor for divorce. So very early on, we have to learn how to express gratitude with our actions that are reciprocal and with words that say, thank you for doing this. That was very nice. I appreciate that you did that. We need to say it so that they understand that their activities are appreciated by you and they're doing a good job. And you need to also say it to reinforce that you're not taking them for granted and that you actually are observing these things. So it's really good practice. If we're not in the habit of offering compliments, offering appreciation, sharing our gratitude, it's time to start, because it's very, very essential for our relationships developing in a proper mood.
And also, it's important to engage in loving exchanges like Srila Rupa Goswami, he recommended. These 6 loving exchanges. And 2 of them, Vaishnavas, especially Grihastas, have perfected, which is to distribute prasadam and accept prasadam. I don't think I know any devotees who ever starved to death. Prasadam distribution in household life is something that you're always doing. And as Uttama was saying, you should have gratitude for that and appreciate that. It's a very wonderful thing. And also sometimes as Vaishnavas, we give gifts and exchange gifts. So that's also a loving exchange. And the other very important loving exchange recommended by Rupa Goswami is to reveal your mind in confidence and hear in confidence. And again, that's very important. And in this regard, I'm going to read the second quote I sent you. Guyam akiti prichati, and you disclose your mind. There is no secrecy between the lover and the beloved. And the other party also discloses. In this way, love becomes manifest. And that's from a lecture by Srila Prabhupada, July 6th, 1976, from Madhya Lila 2101. So Srila Prabhupada, he's saying that love becomes manifest by this exchange of what we're feeling in our heart, our hopes, our aspirations, maybe our needs. There's a very open and honest communication, which is also, again, one of our important principles. So this is a very important loving exchange. And it's important for Grihastas to realize that there's many avenues for love and affection. There's emotional connection, which you exchange by revealing your heart to each other. There's the connection of shared activities that you do, seva together. You look after the children together. You look after your household together. There's the exchange of intellectual realizations. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, how devotees derive great satisfaction and bliss enlightening one another and conversing about Krishna. And that's also a loving exchange, and that's very pleasing to Krishna. And then there's also physical affection, like hugs, and so there's many ways to be affectionate. And again, the danger of those negative paradigms is sometimes couples think that I must not show any affection, otherwise it might lead to something which is quote unquote illicit. And so devotees might minimize intellectual connection out of fear there might be some physical attraction. They might avoid shared activity because they're afraid it might lead to some connection. They might avoid having philosophical discussions together because it might lead to some physical attraction. But after some time, by avoiding all these types of connections and methods of exchanging love, they eventually have no connection. And therefore we see often as many divorces in our society. So it's very important that couples not minimize affection in the name of spiritual life. It's something that couples have to negotiate and navigate very carefully and conscientiously for the health of their marriage. So within marriage, it's a sacred bond. And that bond is based on mutual service and mutual reciprocation of love and affection between themselves and between Krishna. And it's important to understand that the love within a family, it's not just about you and your spouse or about you and your spouse and your children. It's about you and your spouse and your children and even your community in relationship with Krishna. Srila Prabhupada, he was describing once what is love, and he said, why do we love this body? Everyone cares for the body. And he said, because of the presence of the soul. We care for the body. No, he said, no one cares for a dead body. And he said, why do we care for the soul? Because it's connected to Krishna. And then he said, why do we care for others? Our spouse, our children, our family, our community. And he said, again, because of the presence of the soul. And then Srila Prabhupada said, in this way that love goes to Krishna. So it's very important to realize that our relationships are directly connected to Krishna, and our healthy relationships with others, our healthy, loving Vaishnava relationships are the manifestation of our realization of Krishna consciousness. That's a very important realization. So, go ahead. Oh, okay. So important to realize that that is a very important part of your Krishna consciousness, is that loving bondage of marriage. So within marriage, there's also, it's a commitment. And it's a commitment to love and serve each other. And sometimes in marriage, I won't say sometimes, in all marriages, there's going to be challenges and difficult times, especially when couples begin to discover their differences, and they have to negotiate. That can be a challenging time. And unfortunately, many couples, when they come to the point of discovering their differences, they'll divorce. Whereas if they simply learn to respect and honor those differences, the differences can actually strengthen the relationship. So at times in marriage, there's what you call constraint commitment.
You're bound by the law that we're married, we can't just divorce.
We made a vow before the sacred fire, maybe even before the guru, before the temple deities. And at those times in our marriage, when we face those challenges, that constraint commitment gives us the strength to okay, we're going to work this out because we made this commitment to do this together.
And you're legally tied in marriage.
But in your marriage, you don't want to be continually, year after year, decade after decade, relying on constraint commitment. That we're just sticking it out. We're miserable as anything. We have so many differences. We're living in two separate parallel worlds. And we're just
But it's my duty to
My
continue
duty.
because we're married. And that's true, but
Yeah, and that's good that you're committed. But our real commitment was that Srila Prabhupada, he wanted us to chant and be happy. He wanted us to actually be happy. And so we actually have that duty
to figure out how to make each other happy.
because that is going to be pleasing to Krishna. And that is going to be a great asset to the Krishna consciousness movement if our society is filled with happily married couples and happy children, well adjusted. And that's a very important point, too, that Uttama mentioned earlier, that children thrive when there's an atmosphere of love and affection within a family.
And as my husband was touching on earlier, the broader stance of family to include extended family and community. Because that extended family and community is also very vital in providing the sense of belonging and security. So we need to also have loving Vaishnava dealings with community members. And it's very strengthening to have a group of devotees that you do have loving, affectionate, warm relationships with. So you get that support you need through the trying times in your marriage or in your Krishna consciousness, and that you can also help them. So it's very, very vital that we extend that, family love and affection to include our community members also. And that's what will make Krishna consciousness really attractive to outsiders. They don't come and join because we have big temples. They come and join because they see a sense of loving community. And that's what is going to be attractive. So it's going to be attractive when our communities have that love and affection, and when they see the individual families have a lot of love and affection. That is going to attract them to Krishna consciousness. And the reason we have that love and affection is because we see each person in relationship with Krishna. And we want to act in such a way that we are seeing Krishna in every relation that we have. And how can we help this person advance? And how do I show my affection in a way that helps them come closer to Krishna? So we have to develop that quality of our affection that's helping people and all of our family members attain that higher good that we're all looking for.
And that's the nature of the spiritual realm. I'll read one last quote. This is from Srimad Bhagavatam 10:13-50. It's the third quote I sent you, Lavanga. In the material world, Rajagun is passion, but in the spiritual world, it is affection. In the material world, affection is contaminated by Rajagun, but in the Shuddha-sattva, the affection that maintains the devotees is transcendental. So affection in the material world can be a little tainted with the modes of passion. But in the spiritual world, it's Shuddha-sattva Prabhupada describes. And Prabhupada describes that affection is what maintains the devotees in the spiritual world. So they don't have paychecks, they don't have pensions that maintain them. They're just maintained by loving relationships with Krishna and all Krishna's devotees. And that's really what we're aspiring for as Vaishnavas, to develop those types of loving exchanges with our families and with everyone around us.
So Hare Krishna.
You seem so nice and so wonderful. So I will dare to ask this question. Hope you won't beat me up. And it won't be about where have you got this cool T-shirt, Prabhu. the question is, you know, from time to time, I hear from devotees when they, you know, completely serious, with a serious face at least, say that devotees divorce so much because their karma burns much quicker. 1 year in a family life for a devotee equals 7 years for a usual mundane karmic person. Yeah, it sounds funny, but believe me, people do say these things. So it means like if you have lived 10 years in a marriage, it means like a full-time length marriage. So how can you comment on that?
I actually don't believe that those devotees have really tackled their anartas. I think that they're putting up a block for their anartas. It's kind of interesting because we had a new premarital couple and they were discussing, I just can't figure out how people deal with anarta and vritti when they don't get into a marriage. Like, how do you clean all those things out of your heart? Because when you're in the close relationships, it kind of forces you to go to those subtler and subtler anartas in our hearts. And those are the hardest ones to get rid of. So if we're divorcing really quickly, I'm skeptical that we're actually looking at those anartas. I think we're just avoiding.
Yeah.
The only qualification we would put in that, if there's abuse, that can be a valid reason for divorce or separation.
But that's not what that person's referring to, I don't think.
But the normal trials and tribulations, if you accept that distress as Krishna is helping me become patient and tolerant and humble.
And what do I need to learn?
And what do I need to learn? And I accept that distress, then that distress is actually like a fire within us that is burning away our false ego and helping us to make spiritual advancement. But the problem is we neglect to see, what am I supposed to learn here? We're always thinking, why doesn't my spouse change?
So the first thing in conflict is to see what's my responsibility. Doesn't mean we're to blame for something, but it's what is my responsibility to do? What part of this conflict can I take responsibility for? That's where we start.
Yeah, while you were just saying all these wonderful things, which I totally agree with, and it does sound ridiculous that 1 year equals 7 years of an ordinary life. I just remember that we often hear this example of cleaning the Gundicha temple, just the way we should clean our heart. Shouldn't we just apply the same principle of cleaning the Gundicha temple to our family relationships? Right?
Yeah. Because it's those anartas in our subtle beings, you know, our mind, intelligence, and false ego, that have the thickest coverings. They're the hardest to get through. And sometimes they haven't been triggered in ordinary life that we know we have a problem there. And they're also of a much finer and subtler makeup. So we may not notice them in everyday life. But when something, you see, close relationships tend to trigger us on a deeper level. And so it shines a light, a flashlight, you know, on that anarta. And what do I need to do to deal with this anarta? Because I'm experiencing some pain here, or maybe I'm causing you some pain. So what am I doing wrong? What is it that I have this expectation for, you know? So it's very conducive to our spiritual life to deal with those subtle anartas.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you for joining us today. Hare Krishna, and may Krishna bless you with much family love, affection, community love and affection towards the Supreme Lord. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.